If you think that there may be liability issues with your company, I would recommend incorporating as soon as possible as an LLC. You definitely want to consider the state that you are incorporating in, though, because some states have really high fees that some entrepreneurs, cannot end up paying. Like California has a minimum franchise tax of $800.
Oh, I'm bad taxed. I'm so excited about this because this is a conversation that every entrepreneur needs to listen to. Because, legal is like literally the one thing that most people mess up, right?
Absolutely.
So let's start with your background. Where did you study law?
So, in terms of my background, I am originally from Cincinnati, Ohio. Shout out to Ohio. And I went to undergrad in upstate New York, Colgate University, and then went to law school in Washington, D.C. at George Washington University Law School.
Very nice. And what made you decide to focus on entertainment, sports, and then entrepreneurship?
So, funny enough, when I started law school, I actually went with the intention of being a civil rights lawyer, and then changed courses my second year of law school. I got an internship working for NBC, and just really loved it. I loved going out on shoots and just the energy of being like in television and the television industry. I found it to be a lot more interesting than just kind of like sitting at a desk for 14 hours staring at a computer.
I feel that.
So once I had that internship, I just really loved it and kind of stuck with it.
So what made you start to then venture into the entrepreneurship space? Because I saw a lot of your articles on entrepreneur.com. Like, what sparked that interest?
So I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm the daughter of an entrepreneur. And so it's just been in my blood forever. And when I first started out working in the legal industry, I worked at a large law firm. So I didn't really know what that entrepreneurship life looked like. But eventually when I started my own practice, then I started to realize a lot of the pitfalls and a lot of the issues that entrepreneurs face, because I became one personally.
Indeed.
And then I just happened to start getting referrals from a lot of entrepreneurs and people in this space, and started working with a lot more entrepreneurs, and really found a need for what I was doing.
So as an entrepreneur yourself, you have a law firm, and then you also have diverse representation. Talk to us a little bit about that and why you started it.
Ooh, okay, so I'm going to try to keep this concise. So diverse representation is a new database that lists African American attorneys, agents, managers, and publicists who work in the entertainment industry and also in the sports industry. And there are so many reasons why I decided to start to launch this website. I guess one main reason is because there's still this myth, or a lot of folks have been brainwashed into believing that good representation doesn't necessarily look like them. To have a good lawyer, that lawyer must be a Jewish man. To have a good manager, that manager must be a white man, and there are so many exceptional Black attorneys, so many exceptional Black agents and managers who work in this industry, which is a multi-billion-dollar industry based off of our creativity, based off the creativity of Black folks. And, we make all of this money with our creativity, but we don't really circulate it within our own community. We make the money and then we give it to our white agent or our white attorney or our white manager. And I just want to help figure out a way to break that cycle, and I think we all need to do a better job of just circulating the money within our own communities, supporting each other, especially in this era of wokeness. My whole thing is wokeness isn't about, walking around saying Wakanda forever. It's about who are you hiring, who are you supporting. And through this website, which is free, there's no cost to go on it, you can find a Black agent, you can find a Black publicist, to hire and to be on your team. So
I love that. And I also love the fact that within even the entrepreneurship space, there's so many companies that are building up that are diverse, right?
Yeah.
So they should be looking at like diverse representation in terms of legal. So let's dive into legal a little bit with entrepreneurship and talk about what do you need when you're first starting out?
Ooh, great question. So you need a lot of different things. And I would say one of the biggest things you need if you're working with someone else, so I'll talk about different legal needs depending on how you're actually getting started. But if you're starting out working with somebody else, You know, a lot of people start businesses with their friends or people that they're cool with, and they don't really put the proper paperwork in place. And it ends up to come and bite them in the behind. I'm keeping it PG. And so that's one of the biggest things. Like, if you're starting a business with somebody else, before you do anything, get that relationship in writing, like solidify it in writing, and, you know, write out what that relationship is going to actually look like and how it's going to operate. So that's one of the big things if you're going into business with somebody else. Another huge mistake I see a lot of people do is not properly protecting their intellectual property. So a lot of people, you know, will create a clothing line or will create, you know, a brand, and they won't register the brand as a trademark. And then, you know, they've been operating for 2 years, and they come to me and they say, hey, can you register as a trademark? And it's like, someone's already done it by now.
You're like, actually wait, pump the brakes. That actually happened to me with my first company.
Really?
Oh my God. So, quick story.
Yes, please.
So I had a company that was incorporated and it was venture backed, right? And so I hadn't gone through the proper process of understanding what that trademark process looked like. And I found out that a woman was operating under the same name with almost the same company in another state, right? And so what I learned was, with jurisdiction, like, no matter when they started, they still have jurisdiction over that mark. And so I literally had to go back and change the entire company's name. So yes, 100% she is correct. 100%.
It's a huge issue that I see with a lot of entrepreneurs. And the thing is, one of the biggest other issues I see with entrepreneurs is that they want to save money. And hey, I get it. You know, like, you're bootstrapping, you're getting off the ground. You don't want to spend a lot of money on legal and a lawyer, but it's like, you're either going to spend it now or you're going to pay double later on, you know? So I would recommend spending it now, you know, before you get into a situation that you can't get out of. But I would say those are the two big issues that just kind of pop into mind initially. Not putting the proper paperwork in place when you're starting a business with somebody, and not properly protecting your intellectual property.
When do you think you should actually apply for like an LLC or incorporate the company, and what types of companies should be doing that?
Sure. So if you think that there may be liability issues with your company, you know, I would recommend incorporating as soon as possible as an LLC. You definitely want to consider the state that you are incorporating in, though, because some states have really high fees that some entrepreneurs, you know, cannot end up paying. Like, California has a minimum franchise tax of $800.
Oh, I'm bad taxed. So many things are coming to light at this moment.
I have a ton of clients who want to register in California, and I tell them that before we fill out the paperwork. I'm like, you know, FYI, there's going to be this $800 fee, and they're like, no, I want to do it anyway, you know. And then the fee comes, and it's like, you have to pay that fee whether you've made $1 or not, you know. Yep. So that's just something to kind of think about. But if you think there are going to be any liability issues with your company, you know, you definitely want to incorporate it as an LLC or a corporation. Now, if you have the type of business where you don't think there may be any liability issues, and maybe you're just a writer working from home, you know, where you're not really coming in contact with any third parties, or there just may not be any liability issues, you can operate as a sole proprietor, or file a doing business as with the county. And those fees are literally like $10. So it just depends on what kind of business you're operating.
I love that. I love that advice so much. So, asking for a friend. So what happens when you are back taxed for like years and you haven't actually gone about paying those fees? What happens?
So it can definitely catch up with you. Yeah, it can definitely catch up with you, and the state will find a way to come for their money.
So you mean when they hit that account that I had to close recently? You guys, this is full transparency. I'm not even joking. That I had to close recently because of that situation. But I also had a corporation, so you know. Yeah.
And the other thing is, there's some states like California and New York, they do have exceptions to certain taxes. So you kind of have to know what those exceptions are, but there are some states that there are loopholes around paying some of those taxes.
So what about like not franchising, what about going to a certain state where you're actually, like Delaware, where they have cheaper taxes and incentives? Like, talk about that a little bit.
Right. So a lot of people think about Delaware when they're incorporating a company because they do have their fees are very low, and also they're a very company friendly, business friendly state. Nevada is also a very popular state for business owners because when you file your company, you don't have to disclose your identity. So a lot of people who don't want people to know that they own a certain company, they do it through Nevada, and they also have very low fees. So, it just really kind of depends on what you're looking for. Now, what all states do require, though, is that even if you incorporate in one state, if you do end up conducting a bulk of your business in another state, you do have to incorporate in that state as well as a foreign company. So that's something to think about too. You may have to end up paying double taxes, double filing fees, so something to think about.
That's a great point, because we did have to have the California foreign qualification, tongue twister, in order to operate in both states. So let's talk about that a little bit. If you're a startup, at what point should you be looking at that? Should it be like very early? Should you wait until you have investment? Like, at what point should you be considering incorporating?
Yeah, I would say pretty early, especially if you're looking at like investors and bringing any third parties on board. I would say the earlier the better.
That's awesome. Okay, so guys, if you're obviously starting a company, I definitely second that. I would say if you're having revenue and you're generating revenue and you're not looking for an investor, maybe you should wait a little bit because of all of the fees that are involved. But definitely, if you are considering any type of venture, definitely incorporate, right?
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay, great. So with that being said, with these entrepreneurs who are currently coming up in the system and thinking like, okay, what are some of the tips? They're diving in currently. What are some of the tips that you would give them in terms of legal right away that they should absolutely be focused on?
So I guess to backtrack to one of my earlier comments, one thing I would recommend right away is trademarking, your logo, your brand, your company name, because as I already mentioned, if you wait too long, someone else can snatch it up. But B, one of the more important things is that it's a long process. Mm-hmm. So, I have people come to me and say, hey, I want to trademark my company name. Can I get it done by tomorrow? It's like, I can file the paperwork tomorrow. But the actual process, between the time you file the paperwork until the time you actually receive your trademark can be almost up to a year. So it's a lengthy process. And same with copyrights. It can take almost up to a year to receive that copyright registration or that trademark registration. So, I say do it as soon as possible because it just takes a really long time. So that's really my first. Sorry, I already forgot your question. What was it?
No, you're good. You're good. No, just like what are some of those things you absolutely get out of the way.
Right. So that's definitely one of them, all the IP stuff. And then another one, just any type of agreements that, your company is going to need, get that out of the way. I think it's good to start off the company with just having a handful of like boilerplate contracts, that you may need working with third parties, standard NDAs, standard confidentiality agreements, things like that. I would say those are kind of universal off the bat, and then everything else just kind of depends on the company.
Right. So as an entrepreneur, you're normally strapped for cash, and you're probably bootstrapping because you haven't raised yet. And legal fees, like you said, are very expensive. So how would one go about doing that? Is it a la carte? Should they have somebody on retainer? Like, what's the best advice that you have in terms of acquiring an attorney?
Sure. So yeah, legal fees can definitely add up. Hourly rates can vary anywhere from like $250 an hour to $2,000 an hour, depending on...
I'm in the wrong industry. What?
I know, yeah. depending on the lawyer. So legal fees can definitely add up. A couple things, if you are looking to save money in terms of legal fees, you can tap into legal clinics. So every law school in the country have legal clinics where they provide free legal services to entrepreneurs, to people looking for legal services, and you have law students and law professors who work together to help you with, whatever legal matter you need help with. So, if you're in the LA area, you could look at UCLA, USC, Pepperdine, all these law schools have legal clinics that you can apply to get legal services for. So that's one way to go about saving in terms of legal fees. And then another way is to, honestly, you can also just try to figure out some things on your own and then have an attorney come on board and like clean up the back end. So sometimes I have people who are like, you know, listen, I'm going to try to take a stab at drafting this contract.
You're like, you do that.
Yeah, I'm like, all right, you know. And sometimes it's a hot mess, and sometimes it's like, okay. And, you know, I'll come in and clean it up on the back end. You know what I mean? If they don't want to pay to have everything done from like start to finish, they're like, we'll go ahead and get started. And then if you can like come in and clean it up, and that can like cut off at least like half of maybe your legal fees, you know, if you want to try to take a stab at some of these things yourself and then have a lawyer come in on the back end. So, you know, those are just some things to consider. You can do things a la carte. In the past, most attorneys and more traditional attorneys charge an hourly rate, but there are some attorneys who do a flat fee or, you know, who do a la carte. And then also there's some attorneys who barter, you know, so actually one of my clients is also my hairdresser.
Oh,
she
nice.
could not, you know, she could not really pay for my legal fees, and so now she does my hair for free. So
you're like, I'll be in there Tuesday and Sunday, okay? Send me your paperwork otherwise.
So there are ways to, you know, maybe be creative and barter. You know, if you have a service, you can offer an attorney, or, you know, a product, you can offer an attorney. I have a lot of friends who are lawyers who, you know, work under the barter system with some of their clients.
That's awesome. What are some of the, well, I won't be specific because obviously you have your own legal obligations, but what is some of like the most interesting stories you've come across in terms of like entrepreneurs who just did not do it right?
Oh, that's almost all of them. I mean,
You're like,
no shade.
So it's like after the fact they come to you once it's all broken. You're like, what is this mess?
I don't know what to, yeah, I mean, literally, I don't, not shade, no shade, or maybe it's no shade, I don't know, but like I can't even think of like an entrepreneur client who came to me and like all their ducks were like in a row, and I was like, oh, you got it, you know, like there's definitely a huge hiccups along the way. And I would say,
what's the most common mistake that you've seen?
The most common mistake is people getting into business with other people and not putting anything in writing. Or putting something in writing. I've had people put stuff in writing and didn't sign it. And it's like, what am I supposed to do with this? Okay. But that's like the biggest thing. Like I can't tell you, and this is what I always tell people who go into business with other people, plan for the worst case scenario. You know, you can go into business with your best friend or your mom, and I promise you, 8 times out of 10, things don't work out, you know, and there's an argument, there's, you know, people want to go their separate ways, and you have to plan for all of the worst case scenarios that could happen when you go into business with somebody.
Let's talk about equity for a second. How do you see that split happening when you're going into business with another partner? Well, let's explain equity for the people who don't know. So your business is obviously made up of 100%, right? And then there's an equity split, meaning you have partial ownership of the business. So how do you see that structure happening?
So I see it happening oftentimes, it's usually either split like evenly amongst, you know, the owners, or depending on how much people have invested in the company.
Do you see issues when it's not split evenly?
I do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So do you recommend people focus on like, okay, even though we've gone through, like, for example, Michael Siebel, he's an investor in Silicon Valley. He recommends like, okay, I don't care what you guys did beforehand, split it evenly now, right? Because there's always going to be issues on the back end. So what is your recommendation when it comes to that?
Yeah.
She's like, yep, that's it.
Next question.
We don't have any problems when it's coming to that split. I 100% agree with that. And then, like, do you see like a vesting schedule, which means like as time goes forward, you don't get the equity right away. It kind of vests over time. Do you see that happening a lot?
I do.
Yeah. What's the minimum time in terms of vesting?
Ooh, I've seen a little bit of everything. In terms of minimum, maybe a year?
Okay.
Yeah, but I've seen a little bit of everything.
So that basically means you can't be on the beach chilling while your co-founder is out.
Right.
Busting what they have to do, getting stuff done. And you're like, I'm good. I own 50% of the business. Forget what you're talking about. Yeah, okay. So I love that. Okay. So in terms of diverse representation, how do you recommend people find the platform and anything else that you're working on?
Sure. So diverse representation, it's really easy. You just go to the website www.diverserepresentation.com, and like I mentioned, it lists attorneys, African American attorneys, agents, publicists from all over the United States. It's very easy to navigate. You can also follow us on Instagram at Diverse Representation, and other things I'm working on. Let's see. So I actually write for Entrepreneur Magazine, and so it's kind of, I don't have like a set schedule, so you just kind of have to look out for the different articles. But most of the articles I write about are about the intersection of entrepreneurship, entertainment, sports, and I also write a lot of pieces about entrepreneurship and the African American community. So definitely, be on the lookout for that. What else?
How we find you? What if we need legal services?
Me. So my website is my first name, last name, www.jaiathomas.com, JAIATHOMAS.com. You can also follow me on Instagram, Twitter at Jaia Thomas, and yeah.